Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and to the high table, and to everyone here. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today and to address you. And what I want you to do is just turn to your neighbor and say, I am Africa's now and not Africa's tomorrow. Yeah, thank you, thank you. We are here at a time, as Stephen did indicate, we are 10 years. We have 10 years remaining for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so our gathering here today is very timely and best summed up in one of my favorite African proverbs, and I have so many of them. And this African proverb is that no matter how full the river, it still wants to grow. No matter how full a river is, it still wants to grow. From the Sustainable Development Goals that Mr. Udiambo have just presented to you, to the Climate Change Paris Agreement, and more recently the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, amongst many more. What this is telling us is that the African continent, the entire group, doesn't lack policies, doesn't lack decisions, doesn't lack declarations. But what we must be able to do, as it is summed up in this African proverb, that having rain does not mean having rain clouds does not mean having rain. This therefore means that we must all find a way to spearhead the implementation of these declarations that we have in our means today. Declarations alone will not put food on the table. Decisions alone will not put food on the table. And therefore, spearheading concrete implementation that unlock tangible benefits, especially for you, the youth, is imperative. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking at a time when the mention of Africa in the world represents something else. We are gathered here at a time when the mention of Africa in this world, wherever there is talk of problems, the African continent features prominently. We are a continent that is almost synonymous to problems. We're a continent that is almost synonymous to problems. When you talk of mothers bearing their kids before they reach the age of 5, Africa pops up. When you talk of 257 million people going to bed hungry, Africa pops up. Why? It is unacceptable that in 2019, we are talking about 257 million citizens going to bed with their stomach aching of hunger. Unacceptable. In 2019, that we are talking of a continent where we have 12 million youth graduating into the labor market each and every year and competing with only 3 million jobs. And some of them in search of greener pastures, elusive greener pastures, are risking their dignity, are risking their lives in search of these elusive greener pastures, and others luring themselves into a life of crime for paltry sums of money. And worst of all, climate change. That is already redefining the contours of this continent more dramatically than any other. When you talk of what is already happening, visible to our eyes, whether it is the cyclones that recently affected Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Malawi, or the droughts, that even Kenya is already feeling the impact of it, to the Sahel, where millions are already feeling the impact of drought. The continent of Africa, with a changing climate, disproportionately affecting mostly poor people, is reversing the economic gains that have been made over the past decades. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, these challenges, amongst many, tell us one thing. They tell us that the level of deprivation of our people is unacceptable under any standards. And we should not anywhere discuss these issues as if they're just there for us to talk about them. We must talk about them in realistic terms towards how we can be able to drive action, and more so meaningful action. The level of our people, the deprivation of people in this continent, anywhere in the world, is unacceptable under any standard. It lays bare the urgency to accelerate inclusive world creation. But amidst all these challenges, whether it is kids being buried because they lack nutritious food, 257 million people going to bed hungry. Or youth who are getting into the labor market each and every year, competing for fewer jobs, and being buried under the Mediterranean Sea in search of elusive greener pastures. And some sold into slavery as they crossed the Sahara Desert. These issues should keep us awake. These issues should call us and usher us to action. But all these challenges, as we know, we are comforted by this African proverb that every adversity carries with it the seeds of equal or greater benefit. It tells us that Africa's challenges are disguised opportunities for greatness. I don't know about you, but these challenges, I draw significant personal encouragement from these challenges. It tells me one thing, that Africa is a place to be if you want to make an impact. These challenges tells me one thing, that Africa is a place to be if you want to dream and see your dreams come to fruition. It tells me one thing, that we must be able to redefine Africa's narrative. And redefining Africa's narrative is a fierce urgency of now. Because we know that Africa's narrative and Africa's story is bigger than that of poverty. Africa's narrative is bigger than that of poverty. Africa's story is bigger than that of poverty. Because Africa is too rich to be poor. Africa is too rich to be poor. Because let's face it, poverty is not lack of finance alone, but rather a defeated mindset. Poverty is not only the absence of finance, it is a defeated mindset. For us to drive the sustainable development goals and implement climate action, we must get it right with the correct diagnosis and with the correct solutions. Because we know that the level of deprivation of people anywhere in the world, as I said, is unacceptable under any standard. It constitutes an intolerable breach of the most fundamental basic rights accorded to every living person on this planet Earth in Articles 22 to 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which encapsulate what I would call the Bill of Rights for each and every one, or each and every country in the entire African continent. I'm talking of the right to food. I'm talking of the right to clothing. I'm talking of the right to housing, to medical care, and necessary social services, all of which addresses directly or indirectly to the priority challenges we face as a continent today. But regardless of such provisions, their realizations are still far from true for the majority of citizens across the entire continent. So we should not fool ourselves. We have work to do. We have work to do, but there is hope. And you, the youth, represent the hope for this African continent. Youthfulness is ideas. It is not just mere age. Youthfulness is ideas. You represent hope for the continent because we know that where you will sit when you are old shows where you stood in youth. And therefore you must be able to start preparing a trajectory to write a story of Africa in positive terms, because we know that Africa is too rich to be poor, and Africa's story is bigger than that of poverty. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Africa holds the inviolable title of being the youngest continent, and I say inviolable intentionally. I say inviolable intentionally because you, the youth, give second chance to the continent to correct past mistakes. You, the youth, can therefore no longer be a footnote. You can no longer be a footnote in the chronicles of Africa's development. You must be able to take charge and stop complaining, because complaining is not a strategy. It has never been and will never be. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I say this, and I will tell you with very simple examples why I say you can no longer be a footnote in the chronicles of Africa's development. Across the entire continent today, from east to west, north to south, and central, youth-initiated million-dollar ideas are becoming household names. Names like Cadopat of Cameroon, Africa's first ever touchscreen medical tablet that is transforming her heart conditions are diagnosed, invented by a youth barely in his 30s, or the traffic robots of the Democratic Republic of Congo, invented by a youth just now getting to her 40s. Or the Africa connecting the dots across the entire agro-value chain called Ibago Pramoja. Actually, an application that has been developed just in the past 2 months by youth right here in Kenya in their 20s. What this tells us is that African youth have come of age. That African youth, like you seated here today, you are developing world-beating innovations that have put Africa on the global map. You have become not just a force to reckon with, but what is happening across the continent is a significant indicator of the high caliber of youth that you are, capable of remarkable enterprise that will transform Africa and make Africa to truly rise from the uprising Africa cliche that we've been hearing about. So the message is simple. Despite the odds, you, the youth, have proven to be the providers of substantial solutions for leading the charge of Africa to win in the 21st century. But amidst all these innovations that are happening in the continent, we must be honest with ourselves. All these innovations that you, the youth, are driving, your vibrancy, your entrepreneurial spirit, your ingenuity, being displayed, developing all these opportunities for the continent, we must ask a very simple question, that despite all these excellent innovations, Africa is still where it is today. Africa is still having people going to bed hungry, and the number is increasing. Such a question will only be answered if we are honest to ourselves, if we can do a thorough soul searching. If we can do a thorough soul searching, such a soul searching is inevitable to any right-thinking person and for anyone who cares about this continent. It is critical to any right-thinking person because the paradox of Africa is something that we cannot continuously talk about it in 2019 like it's been talked in the past 60 years. A continent that has got everything but lacks everything. This is paradoxical. Yes, indeed it is. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the continent, how is it that the continent of Africa, which is one of the most resource regions of the globe, ends up last in this age of knowledge and information? How can the devastating challenges that have become synonymous to the name Africa, extreme hunger, poverty, disease, ridiculous high level of youth unemployment exist alongside a continent with immense natural wealth? Just to give you an example, for those of you who took coffee this morning, while it is very likely that the coffee you took was nurtured in Africa's soil, it is 90% certain that the mills that processed and packaged that coffee were nowhere near this African continent. Meaning that up to 90% of jobs, up to 90% of household incomes or government revenues that would provide opportunities locally are lost each and every day. I say scarcely afford, because while we need to be creating no less than 1 million jobs each and every month, African economies can only afford a quarter of this. The same goes for cocoa, a crop that is the primary ingredient of chocolate enjoyed the world over, and for which the continent is the largest producer. But the entire continent gets only a dismal 2% of the 100 billion US dollars worth global chocolate markets. And there is no single indigenous chocolate brand that is popular in our supermarkets today. If there is any, I stand corrected. But to the best of my knowledge, there is none. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, during the independent dispensations in the 60s, South Korea, a country that we all know today, was a country in economic trouble. So bad was the situation that the Korean population faced acute starvation, prompting goodwill from many nations, including from the African continent. If you care to know, Kenya back then gave South Korea a 10,000 US dollar loan and food aid. The loan was later repaid. To cut the story short, fast forward to today, South Korea with no minerals and roughly 5 times smaller than many African countries has an economy estimated at 15 times the combined size of all African economies. Most of you seated here today have got Samsung phones. You've got Samsung TVs in your living rooms or Samsung fridges. All those are manufactured in South Korea. What does Africa manufacture? What do we manufacture as a continent? What do we manufacture as a continent? This example is summed up in one of my African proverbs that I love so much, that he who has no pond should not breed crocodiles. If you do not have a pond, why should you breed crocodiles? The continent of Africa, we cannot cherish poverty. Poverty is not a commodity. We cannot make Africa to be a museum of poverty, because poverty doesn't have a market. There is no market that you can sell poverty. And so we cannot prioritize poverty as the important bit, as our comparative advantage, because we prioritize things that are not important for the continent and leave what is important for the continent to be prioritized by others. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, South Korea didn't use juju to be where it is today. They do not use magic. We believe in juju and witchcraft. They didn't use witchcraft. That's a thing of the past. They did something that Africa should do today. What South Korea did was focusing on maximizing strategic industries for which they held a comparative advantage. And what they did was leveraging on human capital, people's skills and talents. Ignore people's skills and talents at your own peril. And that's what Africa has continuously done for the past 60 years. If you don't put people at the center of development, you lose it. And that's why you give us hope. You can reshape this thinking, because Africa's narrative is bigger than that of poverty. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, what South Korea did was to leverage on their comparative strength. And this is how South Korea built a formidable economic foundation that led to its rise. This is a lesson Africa must learn to win in the 21st century. If not, the 21st century will come apart, and the 22nd century will come with the same stories. We lost the 20th century. We cannot afford to lose the 21st century, because you constitute over 60% of this continent. It means that Africa, you are the owners of this continent. And you don't have to blame anybody. Complaining is not a strategy. Neither is giving up a strategy. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is this lesson from South Korea that Africa must learn, but it's also a lesson all of you seated here today must take home. And I will sum it up with 2 words: skills retooling. You must retool your skills, regardless of your disciplinary background, regardless of your professional or educational background, or having a PhD. Having a PhD means nothing. I have one. It doesn't mean anything. What matters is your skill. If anyone tells you that having a PhD means something, it doesn't mean anything. It is the skills. Skills are your only premium. I have a PhD 10 years ago. You must be able to retool your skills each and every time. And that's a mistake that the continent has made for over so many years. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, taking this decision takes not just about talking about it. You must be able to refine, improve, and realign your skill to tap opportunities that are inherent in this African continent. It will take energy welling from within, which can only come after a moment of self-evaluation and soul-searching. And when you do a soul-searching with all these elements that have combined, where Africa is today, the innovations of the youth, comparing to where South Korea was and where South Korea is today, when you do a thorough soul-searching, things that sometimes we don't want to talk about because we want to be politically correct. Yes, it is good to be politically correct, but we cannot be politically correct when mothers are burying their kids before they reach the age of 5, when 257 million citizens go to bed with a stomach aching of hunger. It pains even to talk about these issues. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, when you do an honest soul searching, you will notice that all we seek in addressing these challenges is in each and every one of us. We look for solutions elsewhere, but we are the solutions. We are the ones we need. You are the solutions that Africa needs. All you need is a mindset change. You need a change in attitude. All of us sitting here, including myself, all we need is a mindset change. We need a change of attitude and mindset from one of victimhood, from one of powerlessness, from one of hopelessness to one of self-belief and confidence. That's all we need. We need a mindset change that takes us away from dependency to being dependable. We need a mindset change that we can self-believe and actually know that we are the ones we need. A mindset change where we can start taking responsibility, personal responsibility. Taking responsibility rather than always blaming others for our problems. For 60 years, we have been blaming others, and we are in intensive care unit, talking about problems as if we can do something about it. We're not doing anything about it. And the only solution lies in a mindset change. Self-belief, starting to take responsibility rather than always blaming others for our problems. Because the experiment of blame game hasn't worked for the past 60 years. And therefore, we cannot continuously experimenting a failed experiment. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about passion. I'm not talking about the passion juice that you buy in supermarkets. I'm talking about passion as a core virtue that is within each and every one of us. Passion is a flame with temperature. It can wax stronger when nurtured, and it can quench when abandoned. With passion, you can go the extra mile to retool your skills, to tap Africa's competitive advantage area. With passion, other additional key qualities can be unlocked like dedication, like determination, like hopefulness, a sense of responsibility towards self, towards your own country, towards ensuring that you can be able to be humble and get you to be ready for the market. And all this takes me to this African proverb: cross a river in a crowd and the crocodiles won't eat you. We are very selfish. We love to do things alone. We like to pull others down. We think that when we succeed alone, we have succeeded. You have actually failed if you think that by succeeding alone, that is success. That is failure. If you cannot lift others from the bottom of the pyramid as you move ahead, if you cannot inspire others, then you failed. And this proverb puts it in perspective. Cross a river in a crowd and the crocodiles won't eat you. Africa's sovereign capital, you, the youth seated here today, will only be optimally engaged if we divest from individualism to collectivism. If we divest from selfishness to selflessness. If we divest from hopelessness to hopefulness. If we divest from demeaning and patronizing others to respect for all. If we divest from focusing on physical resources to prioritizing and investing in people's skills and talents. That's the panaceas for Africa's transformation. And these are things within us. If we do not get the software right, we can never get the hardware right. And the software is this introspective, soul-searching that we are doing here today. And these things we can do. They've been done before. But we are a generation that cannot gamble anymore. We cannot gamble when people are going to bed hungry. When our youth are buried under the Mediterranean Sea. We must usher ourselves to action. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the essence of what I call innovative volunteerism. A paradigm shift in mindset thinking, premised on a very simple idea. How do we ignite the passion and inspiration in each and every one to leverage on what he or she have got in a structured way? leveraging on people's passion and inspiration in a structured way, providing guidance so that they can be able to realign their skills and talents, leveraging on their ongoing work or initiatives, regardless of discipline, to tap into opportunities in the entire agro value chain in the continent. That is worth $1 trillion US. But Africa is importing food worth $35 billion US each and every year. That means Africa is so rich. Importing food, when we are losing food each and every year worth $48 billion US. This is a fallacy. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the jungle is stronger than the elephant. This African proverb reminds us all that none of us is bigger than Africa. None of us is bigger than the African continent. Africa's failures are an indictment to each and every one of us as individuals. Our failures to take remedial steps within our own spheres of influence is certainly counted against us. But thanks to innovative volunteerism, there is hope, and the tide is already turning across the entire African continent, where ordinary citizens like you and me are taking the charge into their hands. Youth across the entire African continent are rising to the occasion and seizing the opportunity and saying enough that challenges are disguised opportunities, that Africa's adversity actually presents opportunities. These youth have risen above empty complaints and blaming others. They've risen above the blame game and leverage on climate actions towards building a better Africa for themselves and for those yet to be born. Through innovative volunteerism, they've chosen to listen rather than to blame. Through innovative volunteerism, they've chosen to learn, to be guided, and retooling their skills, refining and realigning their skills to tap into the agro value chain that is worth $1 trillion US in Kenya, where we are today. Through innovative volunteerism actors, youth like yourself, coming out of university and not complaining, but sitting down, willing to learn, having an open mind, not complaining, have actually come together. They've been guided to improve, refine, and align their skills towards tapping the losses across the Kenya agro value chain that is costing Kenya each and every year 50 billion Kenyan shillings. And what they have done, they have come up with an application to connect the dots across the entire agro value chain, from inputs to financing opportunities, to adding value using solar clean energy, to connecting people to markets, and coming up with the first ever connecting the dots application in the entire globe called Ebagro Pamoja, that is linking agro producers to intervening services. It is not only here in Kenya. In Nigeria, innovative volunteerism actors just like yourselves have come together and using similar logic like their counterparts here in Kenya, have focused on the fish value chain as well as the cassava value chain, leveraging their skills and talents to link producers to clean energy solutions so that they can add value. These examples are not only in Nigeria, they are happening in Uganda, in Togo, the Gambia, Zimbabwe, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, and across the entire African continent. What all this tells us is that no one can ever change things. No one ever change things by complaining or by fighting the existing realities. To change things, we must be able to build new models that render existing models obsolete. And these model builders are people, not material. Prioritizing material is the failure of the continent. The belief that we cannot do things because we don't have money has blinded us never ever to do anything. Money alone cannot do anything. It is you, the individual. You must get inspired and find a purpose of why you do exist, because your mere existence is a blessing. By living and existing is a blessing, and if you do not use your skills and talents to be able to do something, you are contributing to Africa's failure. And blame nobody but yourself. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, this is the essence of innovative volunteerism. All of you here today need to leverage on nothing but your skills and talents and your constant quest to perfect and retool these skills. And this takes me to my first point. You must position yourself to be competitive in this world. Each of us sitting here today must look inwards to assess which kind of skills you've got. Degrees open doors. but they are not enough. Having a PhD is not the end of the world. Studying in Harvard University, yes, I went there. It's not the end of the world. It is what you do with what you have, which is you. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, you must look inwardly to assess which are the skills, talent, and intellect you've been blessed with. And then you must look outwards at the surroundings and the opportunities they present. Because Africa has many challenges, but these represent opportunities. They represent opportunities that you can tap into. And therefore, you must be able to reject the mindset of running away from opportunities simply because they are disguised challenges, or spending your entire day complaining and blaming others. That has not worked, it will never work. And that takes me to my second point. You must become competitive. In a global village in which we live today, the globe, what matters is not how much you complain or how much negativity you tweet about others, or how much you blame your government or the entire African continent. What matters is what you can offer. You must position yourself. And as you position yourself, you may realize that a particular challenge you want to address needs an additional skill or refining of a given skill set. What this means is that you should treasure your skills and work constantly to perfect them. What will make you relevant in this global community in which we live today is not about your country of origin. It is not because you are a Cameroonian or a Kenyan or a Nigerian that matters. What will make you stand out in this competitive globe, it will be your skill. So your skill is your only premium. And that takes me to my third point. You must engage in the areas of competitive advantage in the African continent. If you take Kenya, which I mentioned, 500 million US dollars, 50 billion Kenyan shilling being lost in the entire global value chain because of inefficiency in the form of post-harvest losses. We take the entire African continent, losing 48 billion US dollars each and every year because of post-harvest losses. That then means that this provides the shortest route to building competitive enterprises for each and every one of you, regardless of profession. And this is the agro value chain. And I'm not talking about farming here, because anytime we mention the agro value chain or agriculture, you think about farming. I'm not talking about farming here. I'm talking about the linkages along the entire agro value chain, where you can tap into the 50 billion that Kenya is losing each and every year, meaning enterprise engagements that work to eliminate the various inefficiencies, be it processing or storage or linkages. And we are here to support you and guide you, but are you willing to? And that takes me to my fourth point. Be a leader. Be a leader. You do not need to have a position to be a leader. Let me say that again. You do not need to have a position to be a leader. Leadership is about taking personal responsibility. Leadership is about taking personal responsibility, and everyone is a leader. All of you seated here today, whether there are 600 of you, it means we have 600 leaders in this room. And if we have you guys here who are leaders, it means that we can influence other 600 out there today when you leave this place, and the others can influence one another. And therefore, the 720 million citizens across the entire continent today that are youthful can be influenced by you guys. So you must become the change makers, because leadership, everyone is a leader, meaning we all must take personal responsibility to do the right thing and inspires others to do right. One is never too young or too old to lead. That fallacy that, no, because you are older, you are a leader. Everybody is a leader. Everybody is a leader, and you do not need a position to be a leader. So as from today, say, we are leaders. Please, I'm not hearing this. Look, say, we are leaders. And we are leaders, and we are going to lead the continent. Thank you very much. As I said, one is never too young or too old to be a leader. Leadership is not about age. And that is why I said youthfulness is about ideas. It's not only about age. Because youthfulness is not static. 20 years ago, I was 20 years old. 20 years after, I am 40 years old. That means that you can never ever use youthfulness as an entitlement, but youthfulness can be used to do things that can transform the African continent. And that is the way we can truly implement the Sustainable Development Goals. It takes passion. Leadership is not about urge, but it's about ideas. It takes passion, inspiration, humility, selflessness, and determination to lead. Leadership means selflessly sharing knowledge. Leadership means putting selfishness on the run and putting selflessness on the cockpit of progress. Leadership means banishing individualism and embracing collectivism. Leadership means sharing ideas and working with others towards a common goal, not bringing others down. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as you do all these things, always know that you will face challenges and letdowns by people. At times, you will struggle with self-doubt. You will make mistakes, but always appreciate anyone who takes his or her time to guide you and never take anything for granted. Always aim to win the respect of many, and if not everyone, and find the best in others and strive to leave the world a better place, whether by ensuring that a mother doesn't bury his or her child before he reaches the age of 5, or ensuring that we can reverse the challenges of post-harvest losses across the entire continent and provide food to the 257 million citizens who are going to bed hungry, or to inspire a youth and guide that youth and motivate so that he or she will not cross or get buried under the Mediterranean because of lack of opportunities in our continent. To know you have touched a life with your actions is to have succeeded. While you may not share the same tribe or the same country, or the same religion, or the same creed, we share a common interest called Africa. We share a common interest to build a prosperous Africa. You now have the raw material to go and be a leader. Thank you.